Welcome back, friends. And Dad, welcome back to the studio.
Thank you. It's nice to be here again.
It's been a minute since we've
Yeah.
been here. We are back today after a little bit of a break, and we actually have two more special episodes to bring you.
And I think they're going to be really special and impactful for you. It's been interesting since the last time we were in the studio. You know, in the first 6 episodes, we talked a lot about how we weren't personally, as individuals or families, dealing with this grief process. And then my brother suddenly dies at the end of July, just a few days before we launched the very first of these podcasts. And it was just been a very interesting time for me emotionally and spiritually and relationally as tapped as the executor and really putting into practice and speaking to family members about some of this topic that we have been working on so much, Michelle, over the course of the last 6 or 8 months.
Man, it was just surreal when that happened because your brother, Preston, your younger brother, but he just really out of nowhere passed really was shocking. And the fact that this podcast was happening and you had conversations with him about this topic because we were preparing for the podcast, which really made his end of life situation a lot smoother. He had taken some steps to make things smoother. But then the conversations we were able to have with our other family members at the service and in the events surrounding that and in the subsequent weeks and months has just been really
amazing. It's been
interesting.
a gift, really. And it's as we're processing our own grief, you just see God's sovereign and perfect timing in these things that though I think we could have had these conversations, they were so much richer and so much more sensitive and I think timely the way we could. And pointing them to this podcast, and we've already gotten feedback. And some of these folks are not very far in their own personal spiritual journey. It's really opened their eyes to the suddenness of being taken without much warning.
Yeah, I felt a little self-serving to be like, yeah, your uncle just died. Did we listen to our podcast about it?
Yeah.
But it was interesting. Just it naturally coming up in conversation. I was like, this is so crazy how we just talked about these things and how really I think it did minister to our family, which is just so special. But then it also just really drove home for both of us the importance of doing this podcast and why we feel so blessed that God put it on our hearts to do this. And we really hope that anyone listening is blessed by it.
Yes, absolutely.
Welcome to Before the Buzzer Conversations, real talk about death, legacy, and what matters most.
I'm Keith, a retired physician.
And I'm Michelle, his daughter, a broadcasting professor.
I'm not dying yet.
Thank God. But even in health, we know death will come, and we need to talk about it.
You know, it's important for parents and their adult children to have those conversations, Michelle.
But it's not always easy to talk about, and that's where we come in.
In this podcast, we'll talk together about what needs to be done before you pass and provide practical ways for you to have these conversations with people in your life.
This is not about doom and gloom. It's about living with purpose, passing on what matters most, and finding peace, even in the unknown.
So before the buzzer sounds, let's have a conversation.
Well, Dad, it certainly has been an interesting couple of months, and we don't take anything for granted in general. I don't take anything for granted in my life, but especially not the timing of this podcast.
Yeah, that's right, Michelle. The name of this podcast is Before the Buzzer Conversations. So today we're going to have a conversation with a very special guest.
Yes, our guest actually is the inspiration for this podcast. Dr. Elizabeth Turnage is the author of Preparing for Glory, which was one of the books that you read, Dad, that prompted your interest in this subject of dying well. And we actually get into that with her.
Exactly. And we're really looking forward to getting her insights. And she's been listening to our podcast. We're looking forward to getting her feedback as well.
Yes. I know she has been. I think she's listened to every episode, which is awesome. But let's not waste any more time and let's listen in now to our conversation with Dr. Turnage.
Dr. Turnage, welcome to Before the Buzzer Conversations. We are really grateful that you could join us today.
Thank you, Keith. It's so great to be here.
Yeah, we're a big fan of your book, especially you, Dad.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Have gifted it to many and talk it up all the time. And again, as you and I have talked in the past, it was clearly the core text for the class that I did at our church that was the forerunner of this podcast. So again, thank you for your contributions to the field and to the church writ large.
Oh, you are so welcome, and thank you all for doing this podcast. It's really been so great to listen to.
No, we appreciate that. We appreciate that you've listened to our podcast. It's just such a privilege that we have you, the expert in this area, listening to the podcast. But, Dr. Turnage, in addition to your impressive career as an author, coach, and speaker, you're a wife, a mom, a grandma. We just heard you had a new grandbaby recently. So 6 grandchildren under the age of 3.
Yes, 3 and under. So
It's great. Well,
crazy Christmas. I mean, we are very privileged to get to be together as a family fairly, a few times a year. We're kind of spread out across the Southeast, and so it's just such a delight.
oh, I love that. That's so great. In addition to all that, you're also a daughter like I am. And I wanted to talk to you about your relationship with your parents because it seemed like that was one of the catalysts for your writing your book and kind of your entrance into this area of study.
Yes, it really was kind of there were several influences that led me to write this book. One of them did have to do with the experience that I had with both of my parents regarding around their death. My dad had been diagnosed with cancer. My parents were divorced. I should explain this because it doesn't make sense that I'm caregiving for them individually. But my dad was diagnosed with cancer about 2 years before he died, and by the time he learned he had prostate cancer, he had not. He was 83. He was a very relatively healthy man, but he had not been to a physician in 40 years, 40.
Oh,
40. Wow.
So, of course, by the time they discovered that he had cancer, it was late in the game, and he really was afraid of death and did not want to have the kinds of discussions that you all have been having. And so, that made things pretty tough. And I was his caregiver. I was going with him to all of the appointments, and I used that time to try to initiate some of these end of life conversations and just to find out more about him, things that I knew I would want to know when he was no longer there. And so, when he died, because he didn't have a lot of these things in place, that made it much harder for my brother and me. And then I had the opposite experience with my mother. Y'all have talked about being planners, and she was a planner, very type A. She owned her own business, she ran her own business. She was just, an amazing woman. And she saw what we went through with my dad, and she already was fairly well organized, but she made it a point to gather all of the end of life documents. To She filled out this little booklet called the obit kit, and it had kind of spiritual legacy questions about, high school, what was your favorite class, different things like that.
mm-hmm.
And and then she ended up dying suddenly. She also died at age 83. And we, again, had been on the exercise bike on January 1st and died on January 11th
Wow.
from COVID. We thought that she had turned the corner. And I mean, she had texted me the night before she died, I think I've turned the corner. And then she died the next night.
Mm.
So obviously, I was in shock, I was in grief, and I was the executor of her estate. And so, I was so grateful that she had really spent the time. She had had some discussions with me. I'll admit I was a little bit more resistant to having these discussions before all of this happened, but she had had discussions with me, and she had a folder that her friend who was, found her after she died, knew where this folder was. It was called Emergency, and you opened it up, and it said her name, and then it said what to do when I die. And, it had a list. Talk
Wow.
about your type A, call
Mhm.
this crematorium. I've already made arrangements. And so on and so forth.
Wow.
That sounds like you, Dad. You have
Yeah.
that planned out
It's a
like that.
gift.
Yeah, yeah, it is. So was that then you to take that personal experience though, and then want to share with more people? What prompted that initially?
Yeah, so it was, there was that, and then because I had been a caregiver, I had written a book called The Waiting Room about my experience in some of those waiting rooms with my dad and with our son who had had a very serious health crisis. And I was invited to be a part of, I was really impressed with this church that actually offered a conference on, they called it The Evening of Life, the theology of death and dying. And so I was going to give a workshop there and be on a panel, but they had a young Christian physician. It would be like you, Keith, when you were, a
Oh,
little
he's
bit.
young. He's
Back
young.
in
You
the
can
Yeah,
still
day.
say
Back
he's
in the
young.
day.
like
Yeah.
I was just so in awe because he was like in his 30s, and he came and he spoke about how Christians, as much as we know about heaven and we know about, we're going to be just fine when we die, we're going to be with Jesus, but that as a whole, the statistics show that Christians are more likely to choose aggressive measures at the end of life, and that Christians are really not as well prepared for some of the practical aspects and even the legacy aspects of the end of life. And so that really got me thinking. And so that was part of the impetus for the book too, was hearing him speak. And then a social worker friend and I began to offer a course, an online course called Organizing Your Life and Legacy. So this book is sort of the outcome of what I experienced with my parents, what I heard from this physician, and then the course that my social worker friend worked in hospice and palliative care. So
Wow. What a great journey, and what a great application of some of that pain and discomfort and challenges you face to convert that into a ministry and some books and teachings. Thank you. Was there resistance, would you say, as you kind of rolled that out? I mean, I can't say that when Michelle and I bring this up, it's the most popular conversation starter, but be interested in your experience. Just sounds like you're in the right church environment for this, but tell us a little bit about what resistance you experienced.
yes, that's such a good question because people ask me that sometimes, and I say, well, it's always a popular topic with the people that come to our conferences or sign up for our courses or buy the book, because you have the preaching to the choir situation, but the people that I don't hear as much from are the ones who are resistant. In our courses, we've heard a lot about, this is why I love the concept of what you all are doing with a father and daughter having this conversation so the rest of us can listen in, because we've heard people say, a woman in her 80s saying, and she's widowed and she's trying to prepare her daughter, and her daughter's like, no, I
Mm,
will
Hmm.
not have this conversation with you. I don't want to talk about it. So
mm,
we've heard that, and then we've heard, sadly, one story was a woman telling us about telling her friend that she was doing this, and that she wanted to prepare her adult children, and her friend was like, no, I'm just going to let them deal with the mess after I'm gone. And so you do hear those really
Hmm.
kind of
Hmm.
sad, painful stories of people we don't want to talk about death in our culture, and so it is hard. But that's the biggest thing that we can do, is begin to have the conversations, pray about the conversations, continue to have the conversations little by little, poco a poco.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, normalize it, and the best we can be really kind of aware of how the spirit moves. Probably like you know, you're in conversations all the time, and it's not that I'm self-promoting the podcast, but people ask me what I'm doing, and I mention this, and sort of almost raise a faith flag to see if there's any curiosity to go the next step.
So you mentioned too about the physician that you heard speak, and him kind of calling out Christians on, kind of prolonging life as long as you can, and we've talked about that several times in the podcast. But do you think there are any misunderstandings, or what have you come across in your research and speaking, misunderstandings that Christians have about death in heaven, or fear about that? Maybe that's why they're prolonging this.
Yeah, I mean, it is, if we think about it theologically, it death was not, as you all have spoken to, not God's intention, but the result of sin and the brokenness, the fallenness of the world. And so to have a fear of death is somewhat normal. It's not as if that's abnormal, or oh, we're Christians, we shouldn't fear death. That is not as God intended it to be, when he created the earth and the cosmos and us as human beings. um, but we also know as Christians that because of Jesus Christ, we are no longer in slavery to that fear. But I think that it takes talking about it and knowing. I think the other confusion is, well, what actually happens when I die?
Hmm.
Because we see the things on social media, or we hear people say, or we see the bumper stickers, heaven has gained another angel.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not actually, we don't become angels when we die. We are going to be with Jesus. And then one day Jesus will return and we will receive a resurrection body. I'm really excited about my
Hmm.
resurrection body. I don't think we talk about that often enough in the church. How great it's going to be to have a resurrection body, how great it's going to be to live in the new heavens and new earth where there is no more pain. But I do think that we need to just be able to sit on that topic for a few moments and say, well, what are you afraid of? For example, my mother, I remember before she had a very serious heart surgery, I was visiting with her the night before that, and she was like, I don't know if I want to go to heaven when I die. She said, is it going to be boring in heaven? And so heaven gets a bad rap too, but what we do know is that we will be with Jesus. We will be in glory. We will be in paradise. And there's a lot we don't know, but we do know that it will be perfect and it will be peaceful and it will be joyful.
Mm-hmm.
And everything that we've ever wanted, we will experience there, because even all of our desires will be healed and whole. And so I think we need to talk about it more and help people with their concerns and help people understand what happens when they die theologically, and that heaven is a very exciting
Mm-hmm.
place to be.
Boy, indeed. I'm about halfway through the book Imagine Heaven that came out a couple years ago. That best series of documentations on near death experiences, which has been controversial, but it's really opened my eyes to even more of that curtain being pulled back about how glorious things are going to be in heaven. So, yeah, thank you. Maybe to just advance our conversation a little bit, as you've done your research for your writing and for your doctoral studies, what could you add as far as you're learning about the art of dying that maybe surprised you the most? Maybe it was kind of an epiphany to you as you looked at that.
Probably the biggest surprise to me and epiphany, I would say, is when I heard that Christian physician speaking and talking about this. I was puzzled. I thought, well, why, if Christians, for example, talking about aggressive measures at the end of life. And so this is this is part of the art of dying. And I think you mentioned in one episode the book The Lost Art of Dying, which
Hmm.
is such an excellent resource by Dr. L.S. Dugdale. And she talks about this, about Christians being more likely to choose aggressive measures at the end of life that um, you know just might prolong death rather than sustain life. So I I was surprised to hear that, and since then I've learned a lot more about having these conversations about what kinds of okay, you're the doctor, Keith, so what kinds of advanced measures would we want to have, and understanding that and just learning simply like what these measures are. People don't know about, for example, CPR. We know about TV CPR, where there's no blood and there's no trauma, and people walk out of the hospital 2 days later.
Yeah.
But people don't know,
Hmm.
Christians don't know, and people in general don't know that that's not often the way CPR works. So it has been an epiphany, because in my mind, the way I think, well, if I'm near the end, I don't want to prolong death. And I don't want to, there's certain measures that I don't want to have. If they allow me to communicate with my family, to be present to my family, to enjoy their presence, then that's one thing. But if they prevent that or make it more likely that I'm isolated in an ICU from my family at the end of my life, I just want to go be with Jesus.
Hmm.
So I've told my family that many times. But so it was a little surprising to me that if we know that we are going to be with Jesus and we are going to be in this glorious place with God, not reunited in the fullest way with God, why would we want to hang around
Yeah,
um,
that's
with a you know
that's
anyway, that's
no, that's good. That's good. I mean, it reminds me of a study a few years ago, a secular study in the medical literature that sort of matched up certain advanced cancers, and they looked at patients, and I may get the proportions a little bit wrong here, but about 85% of patients non without a medical background would be pushing the envelope with aggressive treatment. And when they were matched to physicians with the exact same personal diagnosis, only about 15% leaned into the same treatment. I mean, as health professionals, we sort of realize, and not to say we want to take away hope, or there is great advances in immunotherapy and other ways to handle cancer, but you know, typically, Christian or not Christian, a layperson is going to sort of push as long as they can. Where I think we in the field realize, we sort of hit that futility pretty quickly.
Hmm. And as believers who worship the great physician, I was really surprised by that as well. And I think Dr. Turnage, when my dad and I were walking around a lake last summer up in Arizona, northern Arizona, and we talked about this. It was that moment, that whole concept of just prolonging for prolonging's sake,
Hmm.
instead of just being comfortable with going into the arms of Jesus, that really prompted me to want to have more of these conversations. So it's interesting that was the catalyst for you. It was also the catalyst for me with my dad, and wanting to know more about what his thoughts were. And in previous episodes, we've talked in detail on this podcast about what exactly, Dad, do you want to do as far as pulling a plug if
Hmm.
we're in that type of a situation. And it is difficult and hard to have those conversations, but so important.
so important. Because we've all heard the stories, of the people who've had to make those decisions and they don't know what the person's wishes are. And of course, none of us thinks that that's going to happen to us. We don't think that that's going to be us in that situation, or we don't think that that's going to be our spouse in that situation, or, our child, or our mother or father. And then it becomes very personal. And so that's why we encourage so much. When I say we, the social worker that I lead the workshops with, we encourage people to learn what these medical measures are to understand what that would mean for their quality of life and for their interactions with their family or friends or loved ones, and then make that decision, with some education. Because most of us lay people, we don't know what these things mean,
Hmm.
so we have to do a little bit of research.
Yes, we do, and your book is a great place to start for people. Um, and so, how can our faith communities, like going back to the Christian community, how can these faith communities better equip people to walk alongside people who are dying or approaching a diagnosis? I mean, I'm assuming encouraging them to be steadfast in their faith. But for volunteers, for pastors, what do you have any thoughts or suggestions on that?
Well, I do think that more churches are recognizing that we aging baby boomers are taking over. So the baby boomers are, you may have heard the phrase, the silver tsunami. All of the baby boomers will be age 65 by or older by the year 2030. So I have observed that more churches they're reaching out to me to, have this jumpstart your life and legacy workshop, and let's talk about getting some of these things ready for the end of life. And they're talking about, let's have a caring for aging parents workshop. So I'm seeing that, but I like your question about equipping people to walk specifically alongside those who are facing death, because that is also going to be more and more common in our churches, that we are with people in our church community who are dying. And so learning to not be afraid of being with people. I was actually reading a dissertation this morning about sandwich generation pastors, and a pastor who had been caring for his father as he died wrote about or spoke about how he had learned through that experience that in his hospital visitation, he wanted to be more present. He wanted to stay longer. That usually it was about being in and out in 5 minutes, but he learned what it meant to him to have a pastor stay and not seem rushed. And so I think that that is going to be something growing that we do need to attend to, is how do we actually teach people how to walk alongside the dying in our churches. We certainly have all the reason to offer hope, but we just need to learn how to be present and show that compassion and be prepared for any questions that they might have or fears that they might have.
Hmm. So well said. Well, regrettably, Dr. Turnage, we're starting to come to the end of our time with you. I'd be interested in just if you could leave our listeners today with one invitation or a first step after hearing today's conversation with you, what would that be? What would you encourage folks?
Well, the first is going to be an advertisement for your podcast. I can't help it, but this is what I am saying, and it's what I'm hearing other people say who are kind of in this realm that I'm in, is have these conversations. And I would just add, pray about having these conversations. Maybe you're hearing this today and you say, "Oh, I'd love to talk to my dad, but my dad is like Elizabeth's dad and he doesn't want to talk about it." So pray about it. Try to gently enter the conversation. Pray for the humility that you need in this conversation. I hear that sometimes, adult children can talk to their aging parents and think that they know, this is what you need to do. But both the adult children and the aging parents or aging people need to have a lot of humility. So I would say have the conversations. You can use this podcast. You can that use my book. It was written specifically for this purpose. Like, okay, give this to your dad and say, I'd love to read this and discuss this with you. So the conversations are what is most important right now.
Amen. Amen.
Amen. That's exactly what we're trying to do here. We appreciate it. Well, Dr. Turnage, thank you so much for joining us today. Your book is called Preparing for Glory. We're going to link to it in our show notes, and it is an essential read if this is something top of mind for people. You can also visit your website, elizabethturnage.com, for more information about your coaching, writing, and speaking. Thank you so much for joining us today.
What a pleasure to have you, Dr. Turnage. Thank you so much. Thank you for your ministry. Thank you for the work you're doing. And thank you for the partnership that we've forged over the last few months together. And just bless you and your family and all those cute little grandkids.
Grandbabies.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much for joining us for this special episode. We will be back soon with one more to wrap things up.
Yes. And we'll discuss how we've been implementing these very conversations in our real life grief recently, as we shared earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if we've learned anything through the process of grieving the sudden loss of your brother, dad, my uncle, it's that we are so grateful for these conversations right here. It's inspired us even more to let people know about this podcast. So please share it and make sure you have these conversations too before the buzzer sounds.